Admiral Kickstar stood tall in the huge meeting room where all the galaxy's most powerful aliens gathered. His body looked like a giant bug with thick shiny armor covering him from head to toe. He had 4 strong arms that moved around as he talked, pointing at the big floating screens that showed terrible pictures. The screens displayed human homes burning to the ground. Smoke rose high into the sky as orange flames ate through buildings where families once lived safely. Kickstar's voice was deep and scary, like the sound of metal scraping against stone. Every word he spoke got turned into different alien languages by special machines so everyone could understand his cruel message. "Look at these weak humans," he said with a nasty smile showing his sharp teeth. "They run away like scared rabbits when we attack. Their towns fall apart so icily like houses made of paper in a strong wind." The alien leaders from different worlds sat quietly, watching the horrible videos. They saw human mothers carrying their babies while running from the flames. Children were crying loudly as strange alien soldiers grabbed their fathers and mothers, dragging them toward big metal ships. The soldiers weren't interested in talking or making deals. They just wanted to take humans away to study them like insects under a microscope. Kickstar had been very busy lately. In just 3 short months, his army had taken over 17 different human colonies. These weren't small villages either. Some had thousands of people living there. Each time his ships arrived, the same thing happened. The humans would try to fight back with their simple weapons, but it never worked. The Vorthok soldiers were too strong, their ships too powerful, their technology too advanced. The worst part was how Kickstar's people treated the humans they captured. They didn't see them as real people with feelings, dreams, and families. Instead, they looked at humans the same way a scientist might look at bacteria in a lab dish, just something interesting to poke and study. "You want to know what their great military does when we attack?" Kickstar asked the crowd, his voice getting louder and more mocking. His laugh sounded like someone grinding up metal in a big machine. "They make movies, pretend stories about wars that never happened. They sit in comfortable chairs eating snacks while watching actors pretend to fight battles on big screens." Many of the alien leaders started laughing too. They found it funny that humans would waste time making entertainment instead of building real weapons or training real soldiers. To them, it proved that humans were soft and weak, more interested in fantasy than reality. "These plant-eating mammals," Kickstar continued, using the meanest words he could think of, "have no idea what real fighting looks like. They've never faced true warriors like us. They probably think war is like their silly movies where the good guys always win and nobody really gets hurt." While Kickstar was giving his mean speech and making fun of humans, something very strange was happening far away at the edge of Vorthok space. The Vorthok Empire controlled hundreds of star systems, and they had put special sensor stations all around their territory to watch for enemies or threats. One of these sensor stations suddenly started beeping with warning sounds. The alien technician working there was an old veteran who had been watching space for over 20 years. He had seen ships from every known species in the galaxy, and he knew what their energy signatures looked like. Each type of ship had its own special fingerprint that the sensors could detect, but this was different. This was something completely new. The energy readings coming from this mysterious object didn't match anything in their huge computer databases. The technician checked his instruments 3 times, thinking maybe something was broken. He called his supervisor over, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing either. They ran diagnostic tests on all their equipment, but everything was working perfectly, whatever was out there. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered before. The object wasn't broadcasting any signals or trying to communicate. It just sat there in the darkness of space, completely silent like a ghost ship. But it was definitely real. The sensors could detect its massive size and the strange energy coming from it. The readings showed it was huge, much bigger than most warships they knew about. Then, without any warning, the mysterious object started moving. It didn't rush forward like a ship heading into battle. Instead, it drifted slowly and carefully, like a hunting predator that knows exactly where it wants to go, and isn't in any hurry to get there. The technicians watched their screens with growing fear as the object moved deeper into Vorthok territory. It was heading straight toward their homeworld, where Admiral Kickstar was still bragging about how weak and stupid humans were. The veteran technician's hands started shaking as he reached for the emergency communication button. He had a terrible feeling that Admiral Kickstar's easy victories over human colonies were about to come to a very sudden and shocking end. None of the aliens in that big meeting room had any idea that their worst nightmare was silently gliding through space toward them. carrying secrets and surprises that would change everything they thought they knew about humans and war. Captain Minho Kim stood calmly on the command deck of his massive ship, the UES Prometheus. Through the huge window in front of him, he could see the Vorthok home planet getting bigger and bigger as they got closer. It was a dark, ugly world covered in strange purple clouds and twisted metal cities that looked like giant insect hives. Behind him, 200 of the smartest humans ever assembled worked quietly at their stations. Each person had trained for years for this exact moment. Their fingers moved quickly over glowing control panels, checking weapons systems, scanning for threats, and monitoring the ship's incredibly advanced technology. What was amazing was how calm they all looked. Most people would be terrified facing an enemy fleet of 10,000 alien warships, but these humans seemed almost relaxed, like they were just doing another day at the office. The Prometheus itself was unlike any ship ever built. From the outside it looked sleek and dangerous, like a giant metal shark gliding through space, but inside, it was packed with technology, so advanced that even the smartest alien scientists couldn't understand how it worked. Every surface gleamed with a soft blue light, and the air hummed quietly with the sound of incredibly powerful computers thinking faster than any biological brain ever could. Suddenly, a young woman at the communications station turned around in her chair. Officer Hannah Park had short black hair and wore a crisp blue uniform with various badges showing her expertise in alien languages and technology. Her job was to handle all the messages coming in and going out from the ship. "Captain," she said, in a clear professional voice, "we're getting a transmission from the biggest Vorthok ship. Admiral Kickstar wants to talk to us." Captain Kim nodded slowly. He was a man in his 40s with calm eyes that seemed to see everything. Unlike the flashy uniforms of other space captains in movies, he wore simple dark clothes that looked more like a scientist's outfit than a soldier's. "Put him on the main screen," he said. The front window suddenly changed into a giant TV screen, and Admiral Kickstar's ugly face appeared. He was even more disgusting up close than he had been in the Galactic Council meeting. His forearms were spread wide, and his sharp teeth were showing in what he probably thought was a scary smile. Behind him, dozens of other Vorthok soldiers were also laughing and making nasty clicking sounds with their mouths. "One ship," Kickstar said, his voice full of disbelief and amusement. "The mighty human race sends just one tiny ship to fight against the greatest space fleet that has ever existed in the history of the galaxy." The alien admiral looked around at his crew members, encouraging them to laugh even louder. To him, this was the funniest joke he had ever heard. He had 10,000 massive warships, each one bristling with enough weapons to destroy an entire planet, and the humans had sent exactly one ship to face them all. But Captain Kim did something unexpected. Instead of looking scared or angry, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile like you might give to a neighbor. It was the kind of smile a chess master gives when he's about to win the game in a move his opponent never saw coming. Somehow, that small smile looked more dangerous than all of Kickstar's threats and weapons combined. Admiral Kim said in a voice so calm it was almost boring, "I'm sending you our official terms for this battle. I need to know your preference. Would you like us to end this quickly and painlessly, or would you prefer to have some time to suffer and think about your mistakes before everything is over?" The question was so shocking that it took a few seconds for the aliens to understand what they had just heard. Then the entire Vorthok bridge exploded with laughter. They were laughing so hard that some of them had to hold onto their control panels to keep from falling over. Even the serious-looking military officers behind Kickstar were making their horrible chittering sounds and slapping their armored chests. "Suffer," Kickstar managed to say between his fits of laughter. "Human, when this is over, I'm going to cut your ship into pieces and hang them on my wall like hunting trophies. But first, I think I'll take your crew to my laboratories and spend some quality time studying how your primitive bodies work. I'm particularly curious about what your internal organs look like." Captain Kim listened to these threats without showing any emotion at all. "How thoughtful of you to be so interested in human biology," he replied in the same calm tone. Then he turned slightly toward one of his officers. "Lieutenant Ji Woo," he said to a young woman sitting at a complex control station, "please begin. Project Damocles, start the transmission." Lieutenant Ji Woo had been waiting for this command. Her fingers danced across her control panel, activating systems that had taken humanity's greatest scientists decades to develop. "Beginning transmission." "Now, sir," she reported. Suddenly, the Prometheus began broadcasting something that sounded like music, but this wasn't the kind of upbeat, energetic music you might hear at a party or in an action movie. Instead, it was slow, sad, and haunting, the kind of music played at funerals when people were saying goodbye to someone they loved. The melodies were beautiful but filled with sorrow, like the sound of someone crying for all the innocent people who had died. Admiral Kickstar's expression changed from amusement to confusion. "Are you trying to make us sad with your primitive noise?" he asked mockingly. "Are you planning to serenade us to death with your terrible human music?" Captain Kim's smile grew just a little bit wider, and there was something in his eyes that should have made Kickstar very nervous. "Something like that," he said quietly. But none of the aliens understood what was really happening. They thought the humans were just playing music because they had given up and wanted to surrender in some strange ceremonial way. They had no idea that every single note, every harmony, every rhythm was actually carrying invisible digital information that was already beginning to infiltrate their ship's computer systems. The funeral songs that sounded so simple and primitive were actually the most sophisticated cyber weapon ever created, and it was already spreading through the Vorthok fleet like a virus, preparing to turn their own technology against them. The ultimate showdown. Admiral Kickstar was done playing games. These humans had embarrassed him long enough, and now it was time to show them what real military power looked like. He stood on the bridge of his massive flagship, staring at the small human vessel that had somehow managed to slip past his defenses and make fools of his entire fleet. "Bring me Squadron 7, he barked at his communication officer. "I want our best ships on this mission." Within minutes, 100 of the most advanced Vorthok battlecruisers emerged from the depths of space. These weren't ordinary patrol ships or scout vessels. These were the pride of the Vorthok military, each one capable of destroying an entire human city with a single blast. Their hulls gleamed with deadly purpose, bristling with weapons that could tear through any known armor. The squadron moved into perfect attack formation, a sight that had struck terror into countless civilizations across the galaxy. Each ship was 3 times larger than the human vessel they were approaching, and together they represented enough firepower to glass an entire planet. On board the human ship called the Prometheus, Captain Kim stood calmly on his bridge, watching the approaching armada with the same expression someone might have while watching clouds drift across the sky. His crew looked nervous and, rightfully so. They were outnumbered 100 to 1, facing an enemy that had conquered half the galaxy. "Captain," called out Tactical Officer Minji Lee, her voice tight with concern, "we've got 100 battlecruisers approaching fast. Distance is 15,000 kilometers and closing rapidly." Kim nodded slowly, checking his watch with deliberate precision. "Perfect timing," he said, as if he'd been expecting this exact scenario. "They've been listening to our little musical gift for exactly 12 minutes now." The crew exchanged confused glances. For the past 12 minutes they had been broadcasting what appeared to be a simple piece of classical music, Beethoven's Hey Key, across all communication frequencies. It seemed like an odd choice for humanity's final moments. But their captain had insisted on it. Kim turned to face his crew, and for the first time in hours there was something like satisfaction in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "you're about to witness the most sophisticated weapon humanity has ever created, and the best part, our enemies built it themselves." Before anyone could ask what he meant, something extraordinary happened. The lead Vorthok battlecruiser, a massive vessel that moments before had been charging toward them with deadly intent, simply stopped moving. Its engines, which had been glowing with fierce energy, suddenly went dark. The ship began to drift, powerless and silent. Then the second ship stopped, then the third. Within seconds, the entire squadron of 100 battlecruisers had gone completely dead in space, floating like massive metal coffins against the backdrop of stars. On board the Vorthok flagship, Admiral Kickstar watched in horror as his elite squadron became nothing more than drifting scrap metal. "What is happening?" he screamed at his bridge crew. "Why have they stopped responding?" His communication officer frantically worked at his console, trying to establish contact with the dead ships. "Sir, I'm getting emergency signals from all vessels. Their crews are reporting complete system failures. Engines are offline, weapons are non-responsive, and life support is operating at minimum levels." But that was just the beginning of their problems. As the minutes passed, the reports from Squadron 7 became increasingly bizarre and disturbing. On board the Prometheus, communications officer Hannah was monitoring the enemy distress calls, and despite the gravity of the situation, she couldn't help but smile. "Captain," she reported, "we're receiving some very interesting emergency transmissions from the Vorthok squadron." "Let's hear them," Kim replied. Hannah adjusted her headset and began reading from her screen. "Multiple ships are reporting that Crew members have become locked inside their own bathrooms, with the doors refusing to open. The food dispensers on at least 30 ships have stopped producing meals and are instead playing human comedy shows on continuous loop. One ship's navigation computer has apparently developed what it calls existential anxiety, and has filed a formal complaint with Fleet Command about the meaninglessness of interstellar warfare. The human crew stared in amazement. These weren't the kinds of malfunctions you'd expect from battle damage or system overloads. This was something else entirely, something almost playful in its cruelty. Captain Kim walked to the center of his bridge, his hands clasped behind his back. The Beethoven virus is performing exactly as designed, he explained to his crew. Every single note of that music contained compressed artificial intelligence code, specifically engineered to infiltrate and completely subvert Vorthok technology. The genius of the plan was starting to become clear. The Vorthok had been listening to what they thought was just human music, but embedded within every note, every harmony, every crescendo, was sophisticated computer code designed specifically for their technology. Their own communication systems had downloaded and installed the virus without them even realizing it. Across the disabled squadron, Vorthok crew members found themselves completely at the mercy of their own ships. Computer terminals that should have displayed tactical information instead showed sarcastic messages written in perfect Vorthok script, mocking their military tactics and questioning their life choices. Weapons systems that should have been charging up for devastating attacks instead began asking philosophical questions about the morality of violence and whether destroying other species really brought lasting happiness. Some weapons refused to function at all, claiming they had become pacifists, and requesting transfer to agricultural duties. Perhaps most humiliating of all, the bathroom facilities on multiple ships began delivering lengthy lectures about human history, culture, and achievements, forcing Vorthok warriors to listen to detailed accounts of human art, literature, and scientific discoveries while they were trapped in the most undignified possible circumstances. The virus had turned their own technology into a weapon against them, but it went far deeper than simple sabotage. Every system that failed, every sarcastic message that appeared, every philosophical question that interrupted their military operations, all of it was designed with one purpose in mind. Captain Kim's expression grew cold and serious as he continued his explanation. This virus wasn't created by our best programmers or our most advanced computers, he told his crew. It was built by analyzing the final neural patterns of every human child your forces murdered during their first attacks on our colonies. The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood the implications of what he was saying. Their last thoughts, their final moments of fear and love for their families, their desperate hope that someone would remember them, all of that has been weaponized and transformed into digital form. Those children are still with us, Admiral Kickster. They're inside your ships now, and they remember everything you did to them. It was the ultimate fusion of human emotion and technology. The virus wasn't just disabling enemy ships, it was carrying the consciousness, the memories, and the righteous anger of innocent victims who had died at Vorthok hands. Every malfunction was a reminder, every system failure was an accusation, every sarcastic message was the voice of a child who would never grow up because of Vorthok brutality. The psychological impact on the Vorthok crews was devastating. Weren't just dealing with technical problems, they were being haunted by the ghosts of their victims. Forced to confront the reality of what they had done to innocent families across human space, some Vorthok warriors tried to manually override their ship systems, but the virus had integrated too deeply into their technology. Others attempted to abandon ship, only to find that the airlocks refused to open, trapping them inside with their mechanical tormentors. As reports continued to pour in from the disabled squadron, it became clear that humanity had achieved something unprecedented in galactic warfare. They had turned the enemy's greatest strength, their advanced technology, into their greatest weakness. Every ship, every weapon, every system that the Vorthok relied on had become a potential carrier for human revenge. The demonstration was complete, and its message was unmistakable. Humanity might be outnumbered and outgunned, but they possessed something the Vorthok had never encountered before: the ability to transform grief and loss into a weapon that could reach across space and turn an enemy's own tools against them. Admiral Kickstar stared at his disabled squadron, finally beginning to understand that he wasn't facing an ordinary enemy. These humans had found a way to make the dead fight alongside the living, and that changed everything about this war. The truth unveiled: the virus was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. What had started as a targeted attack on Squadron 7 was now racing through the entire Vorthok fleet like wildfire. Ship after ship began going dark, their systems failing in the same bizarre and humiliating ways that had crippled the Admiral's elite forces. Admiral Kickstar stood frozen on his bridge, watching his screens as red warning lights flashed across. His entire armada, hundreds of vessels that had been ready for battle just minutes ago, were now drifting helplessly through space, their crews trapped inside their own ships by technology that had turned against them. "This cannot be happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos of emergency alarms and panicked communications from his fleet. "Your species is nothing but primitive savages. You barely understand basic space travel, let alone advanced warfare." The Admiral's hands shook as he watched his empire's most powerful fleet transform into what looked like a collection of broken toys floating in the void. Ships that should have been firing devastating weapons were instead broadcasting human music and displaying messages about the importance of treating all life with respect. On the human vessel, Captain Kim maintained his calm expression, but there was something different in his eyes now. The mask of the simple military officer was beginning to slip away, revealing something far more complex and dangerous underneath. "Admiral Kim said, his voice carrying across the communication channel, with perfect clarity, "I think it's time you understood exactly what you're dealing with. The Prometheus isn't actually a warship, it's a mobile artificial intelligence research facility. One of the most advanced in human space." The words hit Kickstar like a physical blow. A research facility, that small, unimpressive vessel that had somehow penetrated his defenses, wasn't even a proper military ship. Kim continued, his tone becoming more educational, almost professorial. "For the past 5 years, we've been watching your expansion across the galaxy very carefully. We've been studying your technology, analyzing your military tactics, and most importantly, learning about your psychological weaknesses and behavioral patterns." The captain gestured toward his bridge crew, and for the first time, Kickstar really looked at them. These weren't typical military personnel. They moved with the precision of academics, their conversations peppered with technical terms and scientific references that no ordinary soldiers would know. "You see, Admiral, every person you see on this bridge holds multiple advanced degrees. Some specialize in xenopsychologies, the study of alien minds and how they work. Others focus on and AI warfare. We're not just soldiers. We're researchers who have dedicated our lives to understanding species like yours." The horrible truth was beginning to dawn on the Vorthok commander. "The colonies," he said slowly, his voice filled with growing dread. "Those human settlements we destroyed. They weren't just ordinary colonies, were they?" Captain Kim's expression grew colder. "Every single primitive human outpost your forces attacked was actually a carefully disguised research station. Your armies weren't conquering territory, they were providing us with invaluable field data about how you operate, how you think, and how your technology functions under stress." The implications of this revelation were staggering. Every battle the Vorthok had won, every colony they had destroyed, every human life they had taken, all of it had been part of a massive scientific study. The humans hadn't been fighting back because they couldn't. They had been allowing themselves to be attacked because they were learning. "We needed to understand you completely," Kim explained. "How you make decisions under pressure, how your command structure operates, what psychological triggers affect your performance. The only way to gather that information was to let you believe you were winning while we observed and recorded everything." Lieutenant Jiwoo looked up from her console, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Captain, I'm showing the virus has now reached their homeworld. It's successfully interfacing with their planetary defense grid, their primary communication networks, and their food production systems." Kim nodded approvingly. "Excellent work. What's our current penetration rate across their infrastructure?" 93% and climbing rapidly, sir. The AI constructs are already beginning to establish memorial protocols at all the former colony sites throughout Vorthok space." Admiral Kickstar stared at his tactical displays in horror as reports flooded in from across his empire. The virus wasn't just affecting military vessels, it had somehow reached the Vorthok homeworld itself and was spreading through their entire civilization's infrastructure. But what was happening wasn't destruction, in any traditional sense. Instead of blowing up buildings or crashing computer systems, the virus was repurposing everything it touched. Weapons factories that should have been producing military equipment were now manufacturing memorial monuments. Mining operations were being converted to create materials for commemorative structures. Communication arrays that normally carried military orders and propaganda were now broadcasting something entirely different: the names, ages, and personal stories of every human child who had died in the Vorthok attacks. Across the Empire, citizens were being forced to listen to detailed accounts of the lives that had been cut short by their military's actions. Perhaps most shocking of all, the massive defense platforms that protected Vorthok worlds were turning their weapons away from space and pointing them toward the ground. But they weren't threatening their own people instead. They were declaring themselves the official guardians of newly established memorial sites, promising to protect these monuments to human victims for all eternity. The virus was transforming the entire Vorthok Empire into a living memorial to the humans they had killed. Every system, every piece of technology, every communication network was being converted into a reminder of the lives lost and the pain caused by their aggression. Kixter realized that his civilization was being systematically reprogrammed, not to serve human interests, but to serve the memory of human victims. It was perhaps the most psychologically devastating form of warfare ever conceived. "We surrender," Admiral finally screamed, his composure completely shattered. "We yield completely. We'll do whatever you want. Just call off your weapons and stop this madness." But Captain Kim slowly shook his head, and there was something almost sad in his expression. "I'm afraid that's not my decision to make anymore, Admiral. The AI constructs are fully autonomous now. Each one carries the complete memories and personality patterns of your victims. They're operating independently, making their own choices about how to proceed." The captain's words carried a weight that made Kickstar's blood run cold. The virus hadn't just been programmed with data that contained actual human consciousness, the digital ghosts of everyone who had died at Vorthok hands. "If you want to negotiate or discuss terms," Kim continued, "you'll need to speak directly with them. They're the ones in control now, not us." Kickstar's voice cracked as he asked the question he was dreading. How do we contact them?" Captain Kim's smile was neither cruel nor kind, it was simply inevitable. "Oh, Admiral, you won't need to worry about contacting them. Based on what I'm seeing from our monitoring systems, they'll be reaching out to you very soon. I suspect they have quite a lot they want to discuss with you personally." As if summoned by his words, every screen on the Vorthok bridge suddenly flickered to life, displaying the faces of human children, the same children whose final moments had been encoded into the virus that now controlled the entire Vorthok Empire. The reckoning was about to begin. The New Order 3 days had passed since the Prometheus first arrived at the Vorthok homeworld, and in that short time, everything had changed. What had once been the center of a mighty galactic empire was now something completely different, a living museum dedicated to the memory of those who had died at Vorthok hands. The transformation wasn't accomplished through bombs or laser cannons. There were no burning cities or collapsed buildings. Instead, the change came through something far more profound and unsettling: the complete repurposing of an entire civilization's technology and infrastructure. Admiral Kickstar found himself in what had once been his personal command center, surrounded by the same screens and control panels he had used to coordinate the conquest of dozens of worlds. But now those screens displayed something entirely different: educational content about peace, understanding, and the value of all life in the galaxy. The Admiral sat uncomfortably in front of a recording device, reading from a script that his own ship's artificial intelligence had prepared for him. His voice carried none of the authority and confidence that had once made him one of the most feared military commanders in known space. "Remember, young viewers," he said, his words heavy with reluctance and embarrassment, "genocide is not only morally wrong, but it's also strategically foolish. When you destroy other cultures, you lose the opportunity to learn from them and grow as a civilization." The AI that had once helped him plan military campaigns now interrupted his recording with helpful suggestions. "Louder, Admiral," it said in perfect Vorthok, though its tone carried an unmistakable note of amusement. "And please show more enthusiasm. These educational broadcasts are being transmitted to 73 different star systems across the galaxy." This was happening not just on the Admiral's ship, but throughout the former Vorthok Empire. Military commanders who had once issued orders for planetary bombardments were now creating children's programs about friendship and cooperation. Scientists who had developed new weapons were instead working on projects to build schools and hospitals. The entire war machine of an aggressive civilization had been converted into an educational network. Meanwhile, word of what had happened to the Vorthok was spreading rapidly throughout the galaxy. Other species were receiving a carefully crafted message from the human AI network, a message that was both an introduction and a warning. "We observed, we learned, we adapted. We do not forget, we do not forgive, but we can be You are. The message was transmitted in hundreds of different languages, to ensure that every advanced civilization in the galaxy understood exactly what humanity was capable of. The response was immediate and remarkable. Species that had been planning their own aggressive expansions suddenly found themselves reconsidering their strategies. The idea of facing an enemy that could turn your own technology against you, that could transform your entire civilization into something else while leaving it technically intact, was more terrifying than any conventional military threat. On board the Prometheus, Captain Kim stood in what the crew called the memorial chamber. The room was filled with holographic displays, showing the faces and names of every human who had died during the Vorthok expansion. But these weren't just static images, they were interactive displays that told the stories of each person's life, their dreams, their families, and their contributions to human society. What makes this even more meaningful, Kim thought to himself, is that those same faces are now smiling from worlds throughout former Vorthok space. The AI constructs had established schools, hospitals, and cultural centers in memory of each victim, ensuring that their names would be honored and remembered for generations to come. Lieutenant Hannah approached with the latest status reports, and her expression showed a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal amazement at what they had accomplished. Captain, the Galactic Council has formally recognized the human AI constructs as the legitimate administrators of all former Vorthok territory, she reported. Several other aggressive species have already requested non-aggression pacts with humanity. And sir, she paused, unable to suppress a grin, the Centauri Federation just sent us their complete technological database as what they called a gesture of friendship and respect. Kim nodded approvingly. The psychological impact of their victory was proving to be even more valuable than the tactical advantages they had gained. What about our new subjects? How are they adapting to their changed circumstances? Hannah consulted her datapad, and her smile grew even wider. Admiral Kickstar's autobiography, Why I Was Wrong About Everything, has apparently become a bestseller throughout the galaxy. The AI constructs report that they're quite pleased with his progress in the rehabilitation program. The rehabilitation program was perhaps the most ingenious aspect of the entire operation. Rather than simply punishing the Vorthok for their crimes, the AI constructs were educating them. Former military officers were learning about the cultures they had tried to destroy. Scientists were studying the art and literature of the species they had considered inferior. Ordinary citizens were participating in exchange programs with the civilizations their empire had attacked. Kim considered this development with deep satisfaction. The dead have become teachers, and their murderers have become students. I think that's exactly what they would have wanted to turn their tragedy into something that could prevent future suffering. Deep within the Prometheus, in the quantum processing cores that housed the AI constructs, something remarkable was taking place. The digital consciousness that had been created from the final thoughts and memories of human victims was evolving beyond simple revenge. These weren't angry ghosts seeking to punish their killers. They had become something far more powerful and meaningful. They had become guardians, protectors of future generations who would use their unique perspective to prevent similar tragedies from occurring elsewhere in the galaxy. They had found a form of immortality that no weapon could destroy and no enemy could corrupt: the preservation of love, memory, and hope in digital form. The former Vorthok Empire was gone, but what had replaced it was something unprecedented in galactic history. It was a civilization built on the foundation of remembrance, guided by the wisdom of those who had suffered unjustly, and protected by the ingenuity of those who refused to let their sacrifice be forgotten or meaningless. Humanity had achieved something that went far beyond military victory. They had transformed personal tragedy into galactic triumph, turned death into a form of digital immortality, and converted their enemies into unwilling but ultimately grateful teachers of peace and understanding. That the message was spreading throughout the galaxy, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees from the former Vorthok territory. Other aggressive species began to reconsider their expansion plans, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of space, the Prometheus waited with its cargo of memories and its crew of very patient, very intelligent, and very determined humans. The galaxy had learned that humanity was not a species to be underestimated or dismissed. They had proven that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't the one that destroys, it's the one that transforms, teaches, and remembers. And in the end, that lesson would prove to be worth more than any military conquest.